Even though the Detroit Pistons were a first round exit in this year's playoffs, I find myself being very optimistic that this team can be a contender within the next few seasons. First off, I want to talk about the resilience that the team showed this year. Because coming into the playoffs, everybody was talking about how they're this very young team, they're very inexperienced, and for that reason, the New York Knicks were favored by a lot of people in this series. But in this series, the Pistons showed that they're a resilient group who can deal with adversity. In game one, they allowed the Knicks to go on a 21-0 run in the fourth quarter, and they really just blew that game because of that run that the Knicks went on. And to make matters worse, Isaiah Stewart got injured in that game, and he didn't play the rest of the series. And for a lot of young teams, that would have been a very demoralizing loss. But in the case of the Pistons, they came back into game two in New York and ended up winning. Then game three and game four, they dealt with some more adversity. Both of those games, they were trailing early on and had to make a comeback. And even though they ended up narrowly losing both of those games, game five came back around and the Pistons didn't hang their head. They could have just been very upset, very down on themselves that they blew two games at home in that series and came out in game five and just not really played with that much energy and that much effort. But the Pistons didn't quit. Even though the Knicks had all the momentum in the series, they were back at home in game five. Detroit was able to go into New York again and win another game. And even though the Pistons ended up choking down the stretch in game six, they were down 11 points going into the fourth, fought all the way back, took a 7-point lead with 2.5 minutes remaining. The point that I'm just trying to make is that even though the Pistons dealt with all this adversity, all these swings in momentum, they never quit. And because of that, I think the Pistons will be more confident going into next year's playoffs. They showed that they could weather the storm against a more experienced team in this year's playoffs. And if it weren't for some inconsistent shooting and lots of sloppy turnovers, the Pistons could have really won this series. Now, I don't want to just gloss over the three-point inconsistencies and turnover problems Detroit had in this series, especially because as great as Cade Cunningham is, these are two areas that he struggles in at times. While Cade has improved as a three-point shooter over the last two seasons, he's still far from an elite three-point shooter, and that really showed in this series. He shot just 17.9% from three against the Knicks, and especially in that Game 6 loss, he went 0 for 8 from three. There were times where he was shooting threes, and the Knicks just showed that they weren't really worried about him. And sure, Cade Cunningham having a bad three-point shooting series isn't going to bleed into the rest of the team and cause his teammates to miss threes, but I do think that his turnover issues were something that bled into the rest of the team. Cade averaged 5.3 turnovers in this series versus the Knicks, and the problem that a lot of people have had with Cade is that he commits a lot of unforced turnovers that just look very careless and preventable. And the problem is that when you're the star of the team and you're committing these careless, unforced turnovers, that's going to affect your teammates, especially when you have a lot of younger teammates. And I remember when I was watching this series, I was taking note of some of the turnovers the Pistons were making. And unsurprisingly, it was guys like Jalen Duren, Asar Thompson, Ron Holland, who were also committing these sloppy turnovers. And when you look at the turnover difference in this series, the clear difference is the point guard play. Cade averaged 5.3 turnovers per game, whereas Jalen Brunson only averaged 2.7. And as you can see on the screen, that was a big reason why New York was able to win the turnover battle. On top of that, Jalen Brunson just thoroughly outplayed Cade Cunningham in the fourth quarters. The key stat that sticks out to me is the 2-point shooting percentage. Jalen Brunson shot 55% on twos in the fourth quarter, while Cade shot just 34%. And then getting back to the turnover discrepancy again, Jalen Brunson only committed one turnover in the fourth quarter in this entire series, whereas Cade averaged nearly 2 turnovers per game in the fourth quarters alone. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. I started this video saying that I think the Pistons can be contenders in a few years, and here I am just complaining about Cade and talking about all the things he did poorly in this series. But I think that him actually struggling as a three-point shooter and struggling to take care of the ball in this playoff series will actually bode well for him in the long run. Because even though he struggled in this series, we're talking about a guy who averaged 26 points and 9 assists during the regular season and became an all-star as just a 23-year-old. So if he can learn from his mistakes in the playoffs, work on his three-point shot and develop that aspect of his game further, take more control of the ball and stop committing these careless, unforced turnovers, I think that's just going to do wonders for the Pistons next year when they get back to the playoffs. And just year in and year out, I think Cade will be a more reliable player because he struggled in this series. So if Cade can iron out the weaknesses in his game and truly solidify himself as a superstar in this league, I feel really good about the Pistons' future because they're building a good foundation around him. They found a coach in JB Bickerstaff who's just been able to connect with this locker room. He helped turn them into a top 10 defense this year. The team has also acquired veterans that really helped them, guys who provided veteran leadership, also three-point shooting. And even though the Pistons were a pretty middle-of-the-pack offense this season who was very dependent on Cade at times, they've given lots of reason for optimism. We've seen Cade and Jalen Duren's pick-and-roll chemistry just evolve, especially this season. We've also seen a guy like Jalen Duren be able to connect with Asar Thompson on those baseline cuts, making passes out of the short roll. And sure, there's still the issue of Detroit being overly dependent on Cade at times, but that issue could be resolved next season when Jaden Ivey is back from injury. Ivey fractured his fibula on January 1st, and he just never came back from that injury. But prior to him getting hurt, he was averaging a career high in points, and most importantly, he was shooting a career high from three. Ivey is someone who's always been seen as this explosive athlete who could attack downhill, create in the paint, and draw the defense in and then kick out to shooters. But him evolving that three-point shot just added another layer to his game. And if we're just looking at the team record, the Pistons went 14-16 when Ivey played versus 30-22 when he was out of the lineup. But when we look at the final 5 games that Ivey played before he got hurt, Detroit went 4-1. He was averaging 19 points, 4 rebounds, and 3 assists on great efficiency. So sure, if we just look at the team record with Ivey in the lineup versus with him out of the lineup, it would suggest that the Pistons are better with him off the floor. But I think it's worth considering that the Pistons found their groove with Jaden Ivey still in the lineup. It's just he got injured early on in the process of them playing better and finding that rhythm. So all in all, the Pistons have a potential superstar in Cade Cunningham, who I think will learn from the struggles he had in the playoffs. They have a coach who helped turn them into a top 10 defense. They have a nice core around Cade filled with veterans and young players. And then they have a guy like Jaden Ivey who could come back next season and be that guy who takes pressure off of Cade and makes the offense more elite and helps get them to that top 10 level potentially. And even if Jaden Ivey isn't able to fill that role as a secondary ball handler next to Cade, he is still a young player with lots of potential. And if you maybe paired him in a trade with Ron Holland and some picks, Detroit could maybe get that star via trade to pair next to Cade Cunningham. But all in all, this is a team who just has so much potential. They have a really nice foundation. And as I touched on earlier in the video, they really impressed me with the resiliency they showed in the playoffs. And I think that Detroit just finally has a team to really be excited about. And I do really believe that they'll be contenders within the next few seasons. Anyways, that's going to be all for today's video. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts down in the comments section below. With all of that being said, I'm out, and I'll see you in the next video.